They say pride comes before the fall. But for Tommy, the fall was faster, harder, and more public than he ever imagined. One moment, he was the golden boy of Apex Towers, strutting through the city in tailored suits, the son of the man everyone feared and respected. The next, he was standing on the street with nothing but a suitcase, a bruised ego, and a name that had turned to poison overnight. It all began with one reckless act. A single kick aimed at an old cleaner. Mimar Grace, the woman he believed was beneath him. He didn't know that behind her worn clothes and quiet gaze lay the true owner of the empire his father managed. Because before redemption can come, temptation will knock. And this time, it won't be a test of his pride. It will be a test of his soul. The street was colder than Tommy had ever known. Not because of the wind, but because of the eyes watching him. People he had once greeted with smug nods now looked away. A week ago, he was chauffeured everywhere. Now, he stood on the pavement with his father's voice still ringing in his ears. "Get out of my house. You're no son of mine." The words cut deeper than any insult from a stranger. Chief Akin Whale wasn't just his father. He was the man who controlled the corridors of Apex Towers, the one who could make or break anyone in this city. And today, he had broken his own son. Tommy's mind replayed the moment that had destroyed everything. The sharp smack of his foot against the frail body of Mimar Grace. The way she had stumbled, but not cried. That haunting look in her eyes, the quiet promise she had whispered. "One day, you will kneel before me." He had laughed then. Now the joke was on him. Within hours, the news had spread. Billionaire's son assaults elderly cleaner blazed across headlines. Photos flooded social media, his sneer frozen in time, her bent figure caught mid-fall. The punishment was swift. Mimar Grace stepped out of the shadows and revealed her true identity as the majority owner of Apex Towers. The board erupted. His father's position crumbled. Their accounts were frozen. Properties seized for investigation. The Whale family name, once a symbol of power, became a curse whispered in hallways. Tommy had thought losing money would be the worst part. It wasn't. He dragged his suitcase down the cracked sidewalk, each step heavier than the last. Luxury cars passed without slowing. He caught his reflection in a shop window, hair messy, eyes bloodshot, shirt collar stained from days of wear. For the first time in his life, Tommy felt small. Not in the way he used to mock others for being small, but in the way the world reminded you that you were nothing without respect. And as night settled in, so did the question he wasn't ready to face. Was this just the beginning of his punishment, or the start of something far worse? The room smelled of damp cement and stale sweat. Its single window was a narrow crack. A battered plastic fan rattled in the corner, blowing warm air that barely moved the heat. He had found the place on the edge of the city, in a neighborhood where no one cared about last names or bank accounts. Here, survival was the only currency, and Tommy had none to spare. The rent was cheap, but even that felt like a mountain. Tommy joined the line of men waiting to be picked for the day's work at the construction site. The first week, his hands blistered so badly he could hardly close them at night. The second week, his shoulders ached until he couldn't lift his arms without gritting his teeth. The foreman didn't care who he was. "Move faster," was all Tommy heard, along with the occasional barked insult when his pace lagged. Sweat soaked through his shirt before the sun had even cleared the rooftops. At lunchtime, he sat alone on a stack of bricks. Maybe they just didn't like his face, the face that still carried a hint of arrogance, even when covered in dust. Nights were worse. Hunger gnawed at him, but he often skipped dinner to save money. The silence in his room pressed on him, broken only by the sound of rats scratching in the walls. Once, he passed a cafe and saw a group of his old friends laughing inside. He hesitated at the window, waiting for one of them to notice him. None did. When he finally stepped inside, the laughter stopped. A friend he'd known since school looked him dead in the eye and said, "You shouldn't be here." The words stung more than the foreman's insults. That night, lying on the thin mattress, Tommy stared at the ceiling and realized the truth. The city had no sympathy for fallen princes. And tomorrow, it would be the same grind. Wake up, work, endure. Only this time, a seed of desperation was taking root. He didn't know it yet. Names from his past stared back at him. People he had once called brothers, the ones who had toasted to his victories and spent his money without hesitation. He started with Ade, his closest friend from university. The call rang twice before Ade answered. Tommy? I'm busy, what's up? I just need a place to crash for a few nights. Things are rough right now. A pause, then a laugh that wasn't kind. Man, you've got to be kidding. After the way you acted? Good luck. The line went dead. One by one, the conversations played out the same. Some gave polite excuses. Others didn't bother to hide their contempt. The truth was clear. When the money disappeared, so did the loyalty. By evening, Tommy found himself outside a sleek bar where he used to host parties. The warm glow inside was a painful contrast to the damp street. Through the glass, he saw familiar faces, glasses raised, the soundless rhythm of laughter and clinking bottles. He stepped inside, hoping at least one person might remember him with kindness. The chatter dimmed as heads turned. For a brief second, he thought they were surprised to see him alive. But then came the smirks, the whispered comments. A man at the corner table, someone Tommy had once covered rent for, called out. Didn't know they let construction workers in here. The room erupted in laughter. Tommy's cheeks burned, but he forced a smile. Just thought I'd say hi. Don't, came the cold reply from another table. We've moved on. The words hit harder than he expected. This was more than rejection. It was exile from a world he had taken for granted. He turned and walked back into the rain, the sound of their laughter following him down the street. Back in his cramped room, he didn't bother to take off his wet jacket. He sat on the edge of the bed, water dripping onto the cracked floor tiles, and stared at his phone again. Not a single new message. Not a single person checking if he was okay. That night, he understood something he had never considered before. Loneliness was heavier than any sack of cement he had carried at the construction site. And tomorrow, he would carry both. The next morning, Tommy stood outside the gates of the Whale estate, staring at the towering black iron bars. He had walked there for nearly an hour, his shoes soaked from the puddles, his clothes stiff with yesterday's rain. For a moment, he hesitated, unsure if stepping forward would lead to forgiveness or another wound he wasn't ready to take. The security guard recognized him immediately. Mr. Tommy, you know you can't just walk in. I'm here to see my father, Tommy said, his voice steadier than he felt. The guard made a call. Minutes later, Chief Akin Whale himself appeared at the top of the stone steps, dressed in a crisp suit that made Tommy painfully aware of his own wrinkled, damp shirt. Their eyes met, and for the first time in years, Tommy saw no warmth there. Only a hard, unyielding stare. Why are you here? Chief Akin's tone was flat, stripped of any trace of a father speaking to his son. Tommy took a deep breath. I came to say I'm sorry. For everything. For the shame I brought, for what I did to that woman. You know nothing, his father cut in sharply. You think one apology erases the disgrace? You humiliated this family. You destroyed our name. The words struck like blows. Tommy stepped forward, but the guard shifted subtly, ready to block him if needed. I've lost everything, Dad. My friends. My home. I've been working just to eat. I need a chance to make it right. Chief Akin's jaw tightened. You had every chance, and you threw them all away. Now you will live with the consequences. From the doorway, Tommy's mother appeared. Her eyes softened when she saw him, but she didn't step forward. Not yet. She knew her husband's pride could not be challenged here, in front of the staff. Without making things worse, Tommy's voice cracked. I'm still your son. You were. Chief Akin replied coldly. But the man standing here now? I don't know him. The gate began to close. His mother's hand lifted slightly, a small, silent gesture that said she still cared, but she didn't speak. And then the heavy iron bars shut with a final clang, sealing Tommy out. Every corner he turned seemed to carry a reminder of what he'd lost. A billboard with the Apex Towers logo, a restaurant where he used to dine without checking the bill. A man in a tailored suit laughing into his phone. That life was gone. By late afternoon, hunger gnawed at him. He stopped at a street vendor, counting the last few coins in his palm. It wasn't enough for even the cheapest meal. The vendor waved him away, muttering under his breath. Tommy kept walking, his stomach tightening in protest. That's when he heard the whistle. Low, sharp, deliberate. He turned to see three men leaning against a wall in the alley. They looked him over like they'd been expecting him. The tallest, a man with a scar slicing across his left eyebrow, stepped forward. You're Chief Akin's boy, right? His voice was casual, but there was an edge to it. Tommy hesitated. I don't go by that anymore. The man smirked. Good. Means you're ready to stop living like a prince and start surviving like the rest of us. Another man, broader and younger, tossed Tommy a bottle of water. You look hungry. You want food? Cash. Maybe even a bed for the night. His tone was almost friendly, but the way his eyes lingered made Tommy uneasy. I don't take charity, Tommy said. It's not charity, the tall one replied. It's work. One job, easy money. No questions asked. Tommy's gut told him to walk away, but the memory of his father turning him out, of the gate closing in his face, of the vendor refusing him a meal, it all pressed against his chest until he couldn't breathe. What kind of job? He asked slowly. The tall man's smile widened. Let's just say, someone has something they don't deserve, and we're going to take it back. You help us, you get a cut. Enough to keep you fed for a month. Tommy's mind wrestled with itself. He wanted to say no, but hunger, pride, and desperation tangled into something heavier than his conscience could hold. All right, he muttered. The man clapped him on the shoulder. That's what I like to hear. Meet us here tomorrow night. We'll make sure you get what's coming to you. As Tommy walked away, the bottle of water sweating in his hand, he told himself it was just this once. One job, then he'd be done. But deep down, a quiet dread began to take root, because even he didn't believe that. The following evening, he told himself again it was just one job, a temporary fix, but the knot in his stomach tightened with every passing minute. The three men appeared like they had stepped out of the darkness itself. The tall one with the scar tossed him a pair of black gloves. Put these on, he said. Don't want to leave fingerprints. Tommy turned the gloves over in his hands. They felt heavier than they should. He slipped them on slowly, his mind screaming at him to throw them back and walk away. But then he thought of the stale, empty room he slept in, the ache of hunger he had felt for days, and the bitter memory of his father's cold eyes. You ready? The broad-shouldered man asked, eyeing him with a mix of challenge and suspicion. Tommy nodded, though the motion felt like a lie. They walked to a dimly lit side street where an old van waited. The moment Tommy climbed inside, the leader began laying out the plan. Break in, grab the cash and valuables, get out in under 5 minutes. No hesitation, no mistakes. If you freeze up, you're done, the scarred man warned. As the van rattled toward the target, Tommy's pulse drummed in his ears. He stared at his reflection in the darkened window, barely recognizing the man looking back. Was this who he was now? Someone willing to trade his last shred of pride for a handful of stolen bills? When the van stopped, the others moved quickly, pulling masks over their faces. Tommy hesitated for a heartbeat too long. Move. One of them barked, shoving him toward the door. That shove was the moment his conscience cracked. His feet carried him forward, over the curb, across the narrow yard, and to the side door of the house. The metal lockpick felt cold against his gloved fingers as he fumbled to open it. Each click of the tumblers felt like a nail in his own coffin. Inside, the house smelled faintly of polished wood and something familiar he couldn't place. His chest tightened. He wanted to turn back. The part of him that still believed he could change began to grow quieter. The living room was dim, lit only by a sliver of moonlight streaming through the curtains. Tommy's eyes darted across polished floors, expensive furniture, and framed photographs on the wall. At first, they were just pictures, blurred faces in the dark. But then his gaze froze. She stood in the photo wearing a vibrant yellow Nigerian wrapper, her smile gentle but strong. The air in his lungs seemed to vanish. Tommy, stop staring and grab something, hissed the man with the scar, rifling through a cabinet. Tommy didn't move. His hands felt like lead. Every detail of that day in the lobby flashed back. The water splashing, his own cruel words, her small frame folding as he kicked her. He hadn't known then who she truly was, but now, standing in her home, he felt the full weight of his mistake pressed down on him. The leader shoved a jewelry box into his hands. Put it in the bag. Tommy's fingers trembled. We shouldn't be here, he whispered. The broad-shouldered man let out a short laugh. What's wrong? Her silver-streaked hair tied back neatly. In her hand, she held a phone, her thumb hovering over the screen. For a moment, no one spoke. The others saw only an obstacle. Tommy saw judgment, disappointment, and something even harder to face, the possibility of forgiveness. The leader lunged forward, but before he could act, red and blue lights flashed outside. Sirens wailed, growing louder. They called the cops, the scarred man shouted. The house erupted in chaos. Drawers slammed shut, footsteps pounded against the floor, curses filled the air. But Tommy didn't move. He just stood there, staring at Mimar Grace, his chest heaving. She didn't shout. She didn't run. She simply looked at him and said, "I warned you, Tommy. One day you would kneel before me." The front door burst open, and police officers swarmed inside. In seconds, Tommy was pushed to the ground, cold metal cuffs locking around his wrists. The others fought and cursed. But Tommy remained silent, his face pressed against the floor, the image of her calm, unwavering eyes burned into his mind. The cold bite of the handcuffs dug into Tommy's wrists as the officers yanked him to his feet. The flashing red and blue lights from outside spilled into the room, painting the walls in chaotic streaks. Shouts from the police mixed with the desperate curses of his accomplices as they were dragged toward the waiting vans. Tommy didn't resist. His body felt numb, his mind trapped in that final look Mimar Grace had given him. Calm, steady, almost pitying. "Move," one of the officers barked, shoving him toward the door. The humid night air hit his face, carrying with it the distant sound of curious neighbors whispering behind drawn curtains. Cameras clicked. Somewhere in the crowd, a phone was filming. His humiliation was now public property. As they pushed him into the back of the police van, he caught sight of Mimar Grace standing at her doorway. She didn't gloat. She didn't look angry. Her arms were folded, her eyes never leaving his face. It made his stomach churn more than if she had screamed at him. The van door slammed shut, plunging him into darkness broken only by a faint light overhead. The metal bench was cold beneath him. Across from him, the scarred man was cursing under his breath, while the broad-shouldered one glared at Tommy as if blaming him for everything. Hours later, the clanging of metal gates welcomed him to the station. The booking process was mechanical, fingerprints pressed onto cards, his name scribbled into forms. The empty sound of a camera shutter capturing his mugshot. By the next morning, the headlines had already spread. CEO's son arrested in break-in. The news anchors didn't spare him. They showed old photos of him at lavish parties, laughing with expensive champagne in hand, next to clips of him being shoved into the police van in handcuffs. Chief Akin Whale's name was everywhere too, dragged through every headline, dissected in every broadcast. The humiliation was total. In the eyes of the city, their family name was now a synonym for disgrace. Prison was worse than Tommy imagined. The stench of sweat and disinfectant clung to the air. The cell was small, the walls covered in faint scratches from those who had come before him. The thin mattress sagged under his weight. Every clang of the bars reminded him that his life was no longer his own. At night, he lay awake, staring at the cracked ceiling, hearing the muffled voices of inmates down the hall. No friends visited. No calls came. Not even his father's lawyers showed up. The only thing that haunted him was the possibility, or maybe the fear, that Mimar Grace would come to see him. And deep down, he didn't know whether he wanted her to. The metallic clank of the cell door opening broke the monotony of Tommy's morning. He sat up slowly, expecting another guard, another round of routine questions. Instead, a figure stepped inside the visiting area, and for a moment, he forgot to breathe. Mimar Grace. She wore a simple Nigerian Ankara dress, the golden-yellow fabric patterned with deep green swirls. Her head was wrapped neatly in a matching scarf, and her presence seemed to fill the cold, gray room with unexpected warmth. Tommy froze, his hands curling into fists under the table. "Why are you here?" he muttered, his voice cracking despite his attempt to sound defiant. Grace's gaze was steady. She didn't sit immediately. She studied him for a long moment, as though searching for the boy he used to be before arrogance had taken over. Finally, she eased into the chair, her movements calm and deliberate. "You think I came to see you suffer?" she began softly. "But that's not why I'm here." Tommy looked away, shame crawling up his neck. "You should hate me." Her lips curved in a small, sad smile. "Hate is heavy, child. I have carried enough burdens in my life. I will not carry that one." For the first time in weeks, his chest tightened for a reason other than anger. He looked at her again, and in her eyes, he didn't see revenge. He saw something he couldn't name. Grace leaned forward slightly. "I know what it is to lose everything," she said. "Years ago, I trusted people who betrayed me. They tried to erase me from my own company. So I disappeared, learned to live quietly, and watch from the shadows. But I also learned that life is not just about punishing those who wrong us. It's about giving them a chance to be better. Her words sank into him like slow rain. I am willing, she continued, to speak for you, to help you get out of here. But freedom will come with a price, and it is not money. You will work, you will listen, and you will make something of yourself. Not for me, for you. Tommy swallowed hard. The idea of leaving prison should have thrilled him, but what she offered felt heavier than the cell walls. A responsibility, a mirror held up to everything he had been. Why? He asked quietly. Because, Grace said, rising from her chair, I believe even the most broken people can stand again if they choose to. As the guard led her away, Tommy sat still, his mind spinning. For the first time, the weight in his chest felt less like chains and more like the start of something he couldn't yet define. The day Tommy walked out of prison, the sky was a pale blue, the kind that felt too calm for the storm inside his chest. Mimar Grace was waiting just beyond the gates, standing with that same quiet dignity he had come to recognize. She handed him a folded shirt and a clean pair of trousers. You can't go home looking like yesterday, she said, her tone light but her eyes sharp. He changed quickly in the visitor's restroom, then followed her to the car. The drive was silent for a long time. Every mile toward the Whale family estate made his palms sweat. He hadn't been there since the night his father threw him out. The night his arrogance had shattered everything. When they finally arrived, the grand gates loomed ahead, still polished and intimidating. The guards recognized Mimar Grace instantly and stepped aside without a word. Tommy's stomach twisted as they walked the familiar path to the main house. Chief Akin Whale was in the sitting room, reading a newspaper. He looked up when they entered, his expression a mixture of surprise and caution. The room felt smaller somehow, the air heavier. Grace didn't waste time. Akin, your son has something to say. Tommy swallowed hard. His voice felt trapped in his throat, but he forced it out. I was wrong, Dad. I was blind, arrogant, and cruel. I hurt people, and I shamed our name. I don't expect you to forget what I did, but I am asking for a chance to make it right. The silence stretched. Akin's eyes were unreadable. For a moment, Tommy thought he might be thrown out again. Then, the older man folded his newspaper, stood, and walked slowly toward his son. You brought disgrace to this family, Akin said, his voice low. You made choices that cannot be undone. But prison changes a man. And if Mimar Grace believes you deserve another chance, then I will trust her judgment. Tommy's shoulders sagged with relief. Thank you, Dad. Akin's hand rested briefly on his son's shoulder before he stepped back. Do not thank me. Prove me right for letting you back in. Grace smiled faintly, her eyes glinting with quiet satisfaction. Then it's settled, she said. We start tomorrow. Tommy, you will work harder than you ever have in your life. Not as the CEO's son, but as a man rebuilding his own worth. Tommy nodded. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of a future worth carrying. The road ahead would be long, but at least now, he wasn't walking it alone. The next morning, Tommy stood in the community center's yard under the burning sun, a shovel in his hands. The orange vest he wore marked him as a participant in the court-mandated community service program. It wasn't a job you could hide behind a desk to do. It was labor in full view of the public, sweeping streets, cleaning graffiti, and repairing broken benches. Each time someone passed by, Tommy felt the weight of their stares. Some were curious, some judgmental, and others openly hostile. Whispers followed him like shadows. That's the Whale boy, someone murmured. The one who kicked the cleaner. The words burned, but he kept working, reminding himself that this humiliation was part of the debt he owed. At noon, Mimar Grace arrived, not in her elegant attire, but in a simple yellow dress patterned with green Nigerian motifs. Her hair wrapped in a traditional headscarf. She didn't come to shield him from the whispers. She came to watch him work. Her gaze was steady, and though she didn't say a word, Tommy could feel the silent challenge in her eyes. Earn this redemption. That afternoon, his task shifted to a local shelter. Here, the sting was sharper. The volunteers he joined were some of the very people he had once insulted when they were junior employees at Apex Towers. Now, he was taking orders from them. At first, the air was cold with unspoken resentment. But Tommy forced himself to listen, follow instructions, and keep his head down. Days turned into weeks. Slowly, his effort began to show. He stayed late to finish tasks, fixed things others overlooked, and even offered to take the jobs no one wanted. People began to notice, though forgiveness didn't come overnight. One afternoon, a man he once belittled handed him a bottle of water. "You're different now," the man said simply, before walking away. The moment struck Tommy deeper than he expected. It wasn't praise, but it was a crack in the wall of resentment. By the end of his first month, Tommy's hands were blistered, his back sore, but his mind clearer than it had been in years. The arrogance that once fueled him had been replaced by something else, a quiet determination to rebuild what he'd destroyed. That night, sitting alone in his small apartment, he realized the truth. Community service wasn't just about paying for the past. It was about proving every single day that he was no longer the man who had kicked a poor cleaner without a second thought. And in that truth, he found the first piece of peace he had felt in a long time. The rain had stopped just before dawn, leaving the streets glistening under the pale morning light. Tommy stepped out of his apartment, the air fresh and cool, carrying the scent of wet earth. Today felt different. For the first time in months, his chest didn't feel weighed down. He walked toward the community hall where Mimar Grace had asked him to meet her. Inside, the room buzzed with quiet activity. Posters lined the walls, each one showing smiling faces of people who had rebuilt their lives after prison. At the center table, Mimar Grace was speaking to a group of volunteers, her presence as commanding as it was warm. When she saw Tommy, her expression softened. "You're on time," she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "That's a good start." She led him to the front, introducing him to the group. "This is Tommy. He has seen the worst of himself, and now he's working to make sure others never fall the same way." The words hit him harder than any insult he had heard before, because they carried a weight of trust. That morning, Tommy's role began. He helped organize donations, spoke with young men who were just out of prison, and told his story in plain, unpolished words. At first, the listeners crossed their arms, skeptical. But as he admitted his mistakes without excuses, something shifted. They began to ask questions, and some even nodded in quiet understanding. Weeks passed, and Tommy's work with the foundation became a routine. He traveled to schools, community centers, and shelters, always alongside Mimar Grace. She rarely spoke about the day he had kicked her, and when she did, it was never with bitterness. "It's not about reminding him of the past," she told one reporter. "It's about showing what can happen when someone chooses to change." One afternoon, as they were leaving an event, Tommy noticed a group of teenagers hanging back. One boy stepped forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was going to join a gang," he said, "but after hearing you, I think I want to do something else." Tommy's throat tightened. He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Then do it. Start today." That night, walking home under the orange glow of the street lamps, Tommy realized something important. Redemption wasn't a single act. It was a lifetime of choices. And while he could never erase the moment that had shattered his life, he could spend every day building something better. It was nearly a year after the day Tommy had walked into the foundation for the first time. The hall was filled again, but this time, it wasn't for another outreach program. It was for him. Rows of chairs were packed with volunteers, former inmates, community leaders, and even journalists. A banner stretched across the stage, celebrating a year of second chances. Tommy stood backstage, adjusting the microphone in his hand, his palms slick with sweat. He had faced construction work in the blazing sun, rejection from old friends, and the cold walls of a prison cell. Yet somehow, this moment, speaking in front of everyone who had witnessed his transformation, felt more terrifying than any of that. When Mimar Grace stepped up to the podium first, the room went quiet. She spoke not as a business tycoon or the woman he had once insulted, but as someone who had watched a man rebuild himself from the ground up. "We all make mistakes," she said, her voice steady, "but not all of us choose to rise from them." Tommy chose to rise. Then she turned to him. "The stage is yours." Tommy walked forward, the sound of his footsteps loud in his ears. He looked over the crowd, people who knew his worst moments and his best. Taking a deep breath, he began. "I used to think the world owed me everything, that my last name was a shield I could hide behind. But I learned the hard way that respect, trust, and dignity aren't given. They're earned every single day." He shared his story from start to finish. The arrogance, the fall, the cold cell, and the unexpected hand of forgiveness. His voice trembled at times, but he didn't shy away from the truth. By the time he finished, the room was silent for a heartbeat, and then erupted into applause. After the event, as people came up to shake his hand, Tommy felt a weight lift. Not the weight of guilt that had been replaced by responsibility. The responsibility to keep living differently, to keep proving that change was possible. That night, as the hall emptied and the lights dimmed, Mimar Grace walked beside him toward the door. "You've come full circle," she said quietly. "Not full," he replied, smiling faintly. "The circle's still being drawn. No matter how far someone has fallen, the path to redemption is never closed. But it must be walked with humility, effort, and consistency. Forgiveness may open the door, but it's the choices we make afterward that keep it open." Thank you for following this journey from the first step to this moment. What would you have done if you were in Tommy's place? And would you have had the courage to change?